So this is it here. I brought a, a copy I prepared earlier. This is 1 year in my life when I was 14, growing up in regional Queensland at the turn of the new century in the year 2000. Sort of trying to figure out who I was in a pretty inhospitable setting, being the NRL mad, all boys school, very sort of toxic macho culture that I went to. And all the sort of torment and horror that came along with that as people sort of realised I was gay before I did. And it was kind of a year of some pretty horrific mental, verbal and physical abuse on an almost daily basis. But the story is also about how I survived that year with the help of the love of my incredible family and a little posse of girlfriends, with a sort of smattering of late 90s pop music in there as well.
Pop music fixes any number of sins, doesn't it? And there's a part in the book, for those of you who haven't read it, you can get it on, I actually read it on Kindle, you can buy it online or have it delivered via Amazon. And for those of you in America, Queensland is sort of like one of the states in Australia. I guess, what would we compare it to in the US?
Florida or?
Yeah, kind of, yeah, Florida makes sense. There's a scene in the book, I want to get on to the tips to writing a memoir, but just quickly, there's a scene in the book towards the end where you go on exchange. And I just like, can you just talk us through, when I read the book, it was quite, very upsetting actually. I found it very, I cried. I cried in the book because I think I really, saw a lot of my friends from high school in your stories of you know, working out your sexuality and your identity and all that kind of stuff. But there was, you went on exchange and your host mother on exchange was wonderful. Can you just talk us through the power of that relationship of someone who wasn't your blood family, but who really, from my reading of it, changed your life?
Absolutely changed my life. She was this sort of, you know, larger than life character, born and raised in Flushing, Queens, who then moved to Connecticut. And she was just, there was not a nasty bone in her body. And she was sort of the first adult who talked to me about my sexuality and what I was figuring out about myself in like just a non-malicious way, in a very understanding way. And she was wonderful. She would drive me to this like gay and lesbian youth group. She took me to queer prom, which I didn't even know was a thing when I was growing up in Australia. And she was just unquestionably there for me. And it was the first time that I'd experienced that. And I was quite unsure growing up if I would ever experience that. So she had a profound impact on me, seeing that the world wasn't always going to be this horror that I had endured, and that there were people out there that would love me and be kind.
Yeah, I just loved her character, and I mean, you know, it's a memoir, so it's real life. But I loved the love and compassion that she showed to you, and I think that that's a great example for all of us of how we can change someone's life who maybe, you know, we haven't even known for that long. But I want to dive in for people who are listening who think they have a story to share, and who are toying with the idea of writing a memoir, or who have had people in their life who've said to them, you should write a memoir. What's that process like? Like, where do you even start?
The great thing is that everyone has a story. I really subscribe to that view that within all of us there are experiences and views and ups and downs that make a compelling story that people can get something from. The flip side of that is that there's a lot of competition. You know, if we all have stories, getting them out there and having them read can be really challenging at times. So what I did was I became aware through a media colleague that a particular publisher was on the hunt for new stories, and I really seized on that opportunity. The problem at the time was that I hadn't written a single word about this story that I'd had rolling around in the back of my mind for years, that I knew could be powerful and that I wanted to tell. And so what I did was just write a really succinct but kind of powerful one-page pitch, outlining who I was, what I wanted to say, the key characters, the sort of key story arcs within this book, and a bit of a point of difference. And for me, it was, this is 1 year in my life, and each chapter would be 1 month in that year from January to December. And it would kind of plot, you know, this roller coaster ride, and share some sort of tales that you read now in 2020 and think, oh, thank God things have changed. But then you sort of have cause to reflect and think, well, first of all, this was not that long ago, and second of all, have things really changed? So I wanted it to be personal, but also thought-provoking, and a little bit different. And so that's what I pitched with a one-pager, and that got me in the door. And then I thought, oh shit, now I've got to write something. So I wrote a sample chapter, which I thought sort of showcased the absolute best of that pitch, and that started the conversation.
And so you wrote an amazing pitch, a one-pager, then you wrote a sample chapter, and then what kind of happens from there? Do they like make you an offer, or like how does that work?
So the person I pitched it to was the head of nonfiction at Simon & Schuster in Australia, and then would also be my editor once the deal was in place. So I worked with him on the pitch. I sort of got him interested, met with him, talked about how it could play out. And then the process from that was writing this sample chapter. And I worked with him on kind of making it as strong as it could be. And then the way it works, I'm told this is sort of how it works in most publishing houses, is that person takes this thing that they've found and they pitch it to the entire team. And that's, you know, other parts of literature within the business, the sales and marketing team, the management. I think the sample chapter even went to the US to be looked at by someone over there at Simon & Schuster. And so the whole business sort of buys in on this idea. And then from there, they made me an offer, and I got to work on actually writing it, and put together 80,000 words in 5.5 months.
Oh my gosh, so you wrote the book in less than 6 months. That's a quick turnaround, hey?
Yes, but as you know, journalists work best to deadlines, and
yes, I do know that.
Yeah, and I just wanted it done so that we could begin the next chapter, no pun, of the journey, which would be editing that, which took 12 months. So it took longer. Yeah,
really?
Took longer to refine it and go through the
Wow.
various sets of hands than it took me to write it.
That surprises me, because I mean, I didn't realize that an editing process could take double the length of the writing process.
Yeah, it's normally the sort of time from deal to having it on shelves is about 18 months. And that's pretty much exactly what it was in my case. They go through it with a fine-tooth comb. There's lots of people that give incredible and valuable feedback. Then there's, you know, 6 rounds of proofreading and restructures and all that sort of jazz. So yeah, it's a lengthy process.
And for people, we've had some questions on Instagram Live from people wanting to know when the TV series or the movie's coming out. And I want to know that too, because I can really see the book 14, for those of you who haven't read it. It's a wonderful read. You've all got time on your hands right now. So I highly recommend you read it. But yeah, so you've got the book deal, you write the book, you edit the book, and then is that it? Like, you obviously launch it, but it seems to me that when it's a great story like yours is, it's actually just the beginning potentially.
Hopefully. So the launch, there's normally a lot involved in it. Unfortunately, my tour was due to start on April 2. And so the coronavirus has sort of thrown a spanner in the works. And that's why I talk to you from my house now, instead of us being in a nice setting, like a cafe or something like that. But normally you'd hit the road and do lots of readings and events and press. I'm doing a little bit of virtual stuff like this and dropping into bookshop events and whatnot. But basically the process is that, you write the book. I did the audio version of it as well, which was another sort of 5 days locked in a studio. And then, yeah, hopefully this is just the beginning. There has been some interest about acquiring the screen rights, which is very exciting. But who knows? We'll see. Watch this space.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we've just got a question as well from someone who wants to know, is it normal that you would get an opportunity to write a sample chapter before you get a deal? Is that like a normal part of getting published as a process?
It's not abnormal. I have two really good mates that have written books, sort of, you know, that theirs were out, I think, sort of 18 months before mine came out.
I'm going to guess one of them's Rick Morton,
One of
100
them
Years
is
of
Rick
Dirt. If you
Morton.
haven't read it, get on that one as well.
One of them is Rick Morton. So he sort of, I think, did much the same that I did, wrote some sample stuff and then wrote the book over the course of a period of time. Conversely, the other friend had written a full manuscript, had sort of gone through it with an agent, and then took it to a publisher. So
Okay.
both are fine. For me, it happened really quickly, and so I didn't have time to write a full book. But I know that, you know, if you've got a great story to tell and you can kind of get them in with a hook or a little taste of what's to come, then, you know, go for it.
And if someone, so you're a journalist, you're a very accomplished journalist. If people don't have a profile as a writer, like if they haven't had a career writing for journalism or whatever, or if they're not, you know, a big influencer or whatever, do you think it's possible still for their stories to get told? And do you have any advice on like how they should kind of, I guess, position themselves to get picked up?
Absolutely. I don't know if I'd call myself an accomplished journalist, but thank you. I'm a journalist, but I'm an unknown author, and I don't really have a profile in that space, and I'm certainly not kind of mainstream. So I would count myself in some regard as being kind of in the camp of someone without a massive profile. I think go for it. Everyone, like I said, everyone has a story to tell, and if you can kind of refine your pitch and find your point of difference and really identify who your book is going to resonate with and emphasize that. I think memoir is a booming part of the literary world. People are really responding, particularly at the moment in uncertain times, to stories that are true and that they can learn something from. So I don't think it matters who you are. If you've got a compelling story, and the capacity to write it, then go for it.
So a great question here from Pooja, who wants to know if you've got a great story, like if you know that your life is a little different, if people are always fascinated in your story. So that's one thing, you've got the story, but then if you don't have the writing skills, if you don't think of yourself as a writer, is there like a middle ground, or like, is it typical, do you know, Shannon, in the memoir industry to kind of partner with a ghostwriter, or what are the options for people who don't fancy themselves as a writer themselves?
Well, I guess firstly, there are a ton of free or very cheap writing courses that people can take, and now's a great opportunity to do it because we're all stuck at home, unable to go to the pub and waste hours a week, as I used to. Yeah, so there's that option, and you could have a go at sort of improving your skills and do it yourself. But absolutely, there are opportunities to partner with different people. It could even be that, let's say you've got a really great story that you think could have impact, but you're not a strong writer. Maybe you could like partner with an illustrator and do a kids book. Like kids books are massive. You could think about doing like a sort of audio podcast series that's complemented by a short form book or a story, a sort of essays compilation. I'm not sure. I think maybe if you had a large profile, a ghostwriter would be the norm, but I'm not sure if for others it's necessarily, but gosh, who knows?
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. And then we've had a couple of other questions of people coming through who are watching who want to read your book, but they're a little bit scared because, well, and I say that because, and thank you to the gentleman who made that comment. He's worried that reading your book will reopen wounds for him because of his experience. And so I'm interested from your perspective as the author, what was that like? Because presumably when you write a memoir, you need to go fairly deep into the best of your life and also the worst. And so how did you manage that? And was it quite traumatizing? Because certainly to read it, you can feel, I felt the hurt that you were going through at that time. So how was that to relive for you?
It was an interesting process. When I took on this project, I had never really told people much of what happened to me. My closest friends knew maybe the surface level detail that school was really terrible and I had a rough time, but that's kind of it. Even my husband knew some of the anecdotes that are in this book, but not the full sort of, year of hell. And my mum, certainly a lot of this was news to her, which was hard and sad. So personally, it was a kind of a traumatic experience at times, but I was really careful that I had a support network in place, that I took regular breaks, that it could be something like I wrote a really tough couple of pages and then went for a nice walk in the park afterwards. I was really cautious that this could be triggering and almost certainly would be triggering. And so it was difficult, but at the end of it all, honestly, I think it was the most cathartic thing that I've ever done. I took this box of pain and shame that I've been carrying around hidden deep inside me for 20 years and let it go. And it was amazing. I joke that it was like free therapy that I got paid for. And so it was great in that regard. But of course, this story is one that's not unique. A lot of gay men have experienced what I experienced, and a lot of gay youth continue to experience what I experienced. So this will be challenging for some people to read. But the thing that I really want to emphasize, and that I hope I did in the book, is the power of kindness and of love, and how simple acts of kindness can change someone's day, give them hope to carry on for another couple of months, and indeed, in one example in the book, save their life. And so I hope that there's some optimism in that story. And of course, when you get to the end of it and you read the sort of, here's what happened in the 20 years after part, and seeing me now on screen, hopefully looking happy, maybe a little bit tired, but that the message that I truly believe and that I'm so passionate about sharing is that it gets better. A terrible day today is tomorrow's lesson learnt or something. And, terrible days, terrible weeks, terrible months, or indeed terrible years don't last forever, and that there is better to come.
Oh, I love that. I love that sentiment. Thank you for sharing that. One more question before we wrap up. I'm conscious of time for everyone's getting on with their day, but what was it like? Did you have to go through a process of deciding what you would and wouldn't put in the book in the sense of your family and friends? And I know there's some teachers mentioned in the book. As an author of a memoir, do you have to decide whether you're going to leave things out in order to protect other people? And what was that process like?
Yeah, it was one of the things that I did, and it's a tip that other writers gave me, and it's one that I totally think is worth doing, is that I didn't edit while I was writing. I just wrote. I left the editing to the end so that I didn't get too much in my own head, that I didn't overthink things or doubt myself. And so when I got to the end, there were definitely some things that I thought, that doesn't need to be in there. It doesn't enrich the story, but it's, it betrays someone's, I don't know, secret. And I change everyone's name in this book who comes across badly, essentially, mostly for legal reasons, but also because, it's been 20 years and maybe the guy that was horrific to me is now lovely and has changed. And I don't want his family and work colleagues to think that that's necessarily reflective of who he is today. So I felt a responsibility to do that. There were some things, some of the worst parts in the book, we muted a little bit just because we didn't want to depress people. We didn't want to, have people think, I can't read any more of this, and miss the hope and optimism. But largely, the story is a reflection of the best and the worst of that year, with a couple of small details left out.
Oh, well, Shannon, look, it's been such a pleasure. And can you just hold up the book for people who might be looking for it online or in the bookstore? 14 is the name of the book. I'm going to put the link on our Instagram so people can download it directly. But I really recommend it. I think I really value that you shared your story and were so vulnerable. Thank you for that. And I took a lot away from it, and it's an emotional read with a wonderful ending. Not to be a spoiler, but it is worth getting through it because it's so wonderful at the way that it turns out. And you can buy it online, and you can follow Shannon. What are your handles and Instagrams and Twitters and all of those things for people to connect?
I'm not on Twitter because it was all consuming, but I am on Instagram, and I share lots of stuff about the book and lots of very cute puppy pictures. And I am I'm Sleemol, which is SLEEMOL. And you can find me on Facebook and whatever. But thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your support. I'm very grateful.
Of course, and we're so excited for you, and we can't wait to see the movie. And I'm excited for the next chapter for you. But the book is called 14. You can download it online. Thank you so much for joining us, Shannon. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.